Alright, so today we're going to be looking at some advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to be looking at what I'm going to be titling it as the subclass of the thief. I pretty much didn't want to come out and put the word assassin on the title, just because I don't want anyone to think that this is an actual how-to or a or anything along those lines. It's still a game, and what we're looking at is one of those classes, or I suppose the main class that kind of confuses people a little bit, and has a lot of additional rules that get in the way of gameplay sometimes. And there's a few tricks and tips that are worth thinking about for the DM, and we'll be going over a couple of pieces that are all related to the class, how to use it, and so on. So the first thing I want to talk about today, before we start into all of that, is that, yep, I get it, it's a long time between drinks. I do want to try and put out content as soon as possible and more often. It's also about the quality of the content, and it's also about the amount of what comes up in terms of conversation, as well as with other people, the questions that get asked and so on. So I have all of those that float in my head, and I try and pick and choose what I think is an important topic or something that's worth exploring. And sometimes it can take a little bit of time. But so there's that. But also, we've just in this last month, obviously, I went to Grogtalk in Florida, Orlando, Florida, and it was magnificent. It was an exceptional time. The people there were fantastic, and we had a great time. We looked at a lot of things, had a few games. I got to talk to many different game designers, developers, as well as a few other companies, and talked to quite a few players, met some great people. We have DaveCon coming up in, I think it's in April, so the celebration of Dave Arneson and his games, as well as a few other things as well. So there's plenty for someone who's interested in old school gaming to get into, and there's a lot happening in the next 3 or 4 months. So and beyond. So it's worth getting in touch with the various developers and conferences and working out what you can and can't go to, or what you want to do. Some of the old school games like Star Frontiers and Paranoia, they all get wheeled out for everyone to enjoy, just to sort of bring back some of the nostalgia of the day. So anyway, so GrogCon was fantastic, and it was great, and I got to meet a lot of people who I've spoken with or communicated with online in various text forms, and got to see and hear the actual accents along the way, which is always interesting. So it was great fun. An exceptional bunch of people who from all over America, and a couple overseas as well, to get in and meet. So it was fun. Hopefully it's going to extend to the next year as well, and then we'll get more involved. But no, that was fun. All right, so now we're getting back onto the programming, and what we're going to look at is, of course, the assassin, and get a little few things done. But we'll start we'll start from the top, as they say. So the assassin is a class that's a subclass of thief, and it came to be as as something that was sort of added a bit later. It wasn't in the original set of classes and so on. And it's a little bit different in the way that it's laid out, in terms of the way that the class is one part one thing and another part something else. But the idea of the assassin class is clearly that you've got a character that is specifically attuned to killing, which of course all the characters are, and we do sort of play this game for that, but I guess the term assassin makes it a little bit more personal in the way that it's set up. So the assassins have a minimum strength, intelligence and dexterity requirements, being 12 strength, 11 intelligence and 12 on the dex, which if you look at it from the standard character, with the average being between 9 and 12, they have to be at the upper end of the average on that average character, and almost entirely always floating in that the top 10, 15, 20% in terms of being able to be over 12 over for dex and strength, and intelligence of being quite high as well. So there's a lot that they have to learn and a lot that they do, and while yes they get some thieving skills, they're obviously they've got access to a lot more weapons as well. If we have a look at the character class chart, we got you can see here that the assassin must wear leather armor in order to be able to do their thing. They can still carry any shield and have access to every weapon. Well, that's pretty open-ended. I mean, the idea that the only other classes that have access to every weapon are fighter, rangers and paladins. So the assassin must have some grander training when it comes to the different types of weapons and their capabilities. So over here at the weapon proficiency table, you can see that the assassin starts with 3 weapons, which is quite reasonable. They have a -2 on their non-proficiency penalty, and they gain an extra weapon at levels 5, then 9 and then 13. As they have a maximum cap on their level, they don't get to just continuously add weapons like fighters do. But what we see is that in terms of the number of weapons and how the weapons are laid out, they're at every point equal with the fighters, paladins and rangers. It's in the player's handbook where we start to get an understanding of poison and how poisons work within the confines of the game, especially in terms of what characters can do and can't do. The concept of poison being something of use with the assassin, or so entwined with what the assassin is that they have it specifically in the assassin area, then obviously it sort of goes with the mold that the assassins are the business is killing and business is good. But what is very interesting in the way that it's all laid out, when they discuss the primary, secondary and tertiary abilities of what the assassin class does, it explains that the first part of the primary abilities of the assassin is that they get to learn more languages, and if they've gotten 15 or more, they can learn some specialist languages and so on. So they actually get to the capabilities of being able to be involved with the different languages and learning languages, which all help them with their other function, their other primary function, which is disguise. So there's a whole thing on disguise, and essentially what we're looking at is that the character is able to adjust his or her height, weight, even coming off looking like a completely different race, gender and so on. And there's a small chance per day that's adjusted based on the type of disguise and how different and how many extra special areas and so on, and how familiar the other characters are with who they're trying to disguise as. So if they're trying to disguise as just a bland militia, That's one thing. If they try and disguise themselves as Prince Emrakul, that's something completely different. So the nature of their primary functions, language and disguise, all come in less so useful in terms of dungeon delving, but much more with the other functions that come into play for being an assassin, which come up to their secondary function of spying. And the spying section we'll have a look at from the DM's guide in a few moments, but essentially this is what the assassin is primarily designed around from the D&D game, AD&D first edition game. We have someone who's able to learn new languages, someone who's able to disguise themselves and function as a spy and getting involved with stealing something or working on missions and so on. Then you've got the tertiary function, which is of course their thieving abilities, because they do the thief skills 2 levels lower than what they actually are. So at 3rd level they get to perform the thief functions as a 1st level thief, except for when they're setting and hiding traps, which are done 2 levels higher than their assassin class. So at 1st level they can set and hide a trap. At 3rd level, if they're 5th level as a thief, 5th level as an assassin, then they get to be finding traps, opening locks, picking pockets as a 3rd level thief, but setting and hiding traps as a 7th level. So that is their part of their function, and those traps can be as simple as alarm bells or actual pits and traps, and we'll have a small little look at what can be done with those things. So one of the last key functions and the most important function of the assassin is also assassination. And as we sort of have a quick look here, we can see that the assassins attack on the same table as thieves, which includes backstabbing, but they may also attack on the assassination table if they surprise a victim and blah 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 and so on. So there's a lot of very special functions that come into play when the character chooses to use assassination, or how they can use their assassination ability. And it starts with, do they get somebody caught unawares? And it ends with, here's a plan on how I want to set up an assassination for this other character. And then we have a look at percentages and conditions and so on. So we'll have a little bit of a conversation on that, and which is obviously something that players may not have really thought about, or DMs haven't really exercised in some way, but we'll have a look and we'll see what we can do in terms of what the DM has to have prepared, and we'll work it from there. So when a player has come to the DM, and this is one of those reasons why I firmly put character creation as a collab between the DM and the player. When the player says to the DM, I wish to have a character that is an assassin, or I want to be an assassin, or a multi-class assassin, or something, the DM needs to have a lot of things worked out in order to be able to make sure that the class is well represented in some way. What's the definition of the assassin in terms of what the player is allowed to be? The requirement for the assassin to have an alignment of evil stems from essentially contract killers and people who have less value on what it is for other life and willing to use people and so on. And what I generally draw upon is characters much like James Bond, who comes across as very lawful evil. Lawful in terms of the overall type of strict set of rules that he follows, but he leaves a lot of bodies behind, some intentional and some unintentional, and doesn't hold a lot of remorse as long as the mission gets done, or as long as what he's after gets fulfilled. And he's ready to pull the trigger on almost anybody at any time. So it's not so much an evil character to the core and so on, but it's an overall lack of empathy with others in a certain way. Now, there's nothing that says that they have to remain evil, and there's nothing that says that there is anything that happens if they lose or if they change their alignment. So perhaps a lawful evil assassin wishing to mend their ways might become lawful neutral, or they might play in that neutral space somewhere at some end. And so that's where we have characters like Michael Weston, who are from Burn Notice, James Bond, John Wick, and all of these who are full-on assassins, and they act as spies, and they act as detectives, or they act as different parts, whatever they need to be in order to get the missions done, and so on. And that means putting people down. And there's lots of different euphemisms for the words, but essentially, if they need to kill someone, they will. If they don't need to kill someone, they don't have to. Or they don't need to if they don't think it's going to be beneficial for them. And that's what they do. And so that's part of what the assassin class has to be thought of in terms of what the DM wants to decide. I'm a DM that doesn't like characters to be alignments of chaotic evil, neutral evil, and that sort of chaotic neutral and so on. But I do allow assassins within a very limited bandwidth. So obviously they have to still be within the confines of the party structure, and they have to have a reason to be involved in some way. So whether it's to do with state-sanctioned activities or something else. So the DM has to figure that out as well. So if the player says to the DM, I want to be an assassin, the DM has to have in their head already an idea of what type of assassins exist. Are they guilds, contracts, and so on? And we have plenty of literary references for characters of different types hanging out together and going on missions, as long as all of their goals align in the same direction, which is what, for the most part, a D&D party is structured. So that's where the DM has to have an idea again of what it is that they're going to allow and what they want the direction to be. And it gets pretty thorough in terms of what the DM has to figure out, because there's a lot that gets put onto the DM to begin with. But these are the sort of questions that only the DM can answer. If you want a character to be more about spying and the disguise and a little bit of assassin and a little bit of thief and a little bit of fighting, then you have to create the scenarios for that. And if you say yes to someone wanting to be an assassin and they turn around and say, well, I'm going to try and disguise as one of the city guards, that's in part of their actual character. And as the DM, you need to think about that and have more of an idea of where it is you want to go and where you want to do with that. So what we'll do is we'll cover a little bit on spying and how it can be used. And sometimes it's roleplay, sometimes it's dice and it happens off screen, as they say. and we just need to sort of work out with the DM how that's going to happen. So here we have our spying chart. And how do we use this? This is the sort of idea that we need to try and do. And as you can see, level of the assassin or spy, and they even go up to 17th, which is not quite right because assassins go up to 15th. If the DM was going to create their own NPC class of spy, that is a different scenario. But for the most part, and generally that might be someone that gets hired by the characters to go and do a particular function or a mission. And what we do is, whatever it is that we wish to do, we have to break it up into one of 3 different categories: simple, difficult, and extraordinary. And then from there, create what is the plan to be done. And hopefully when the player tells the DM what they want to do, that's where it comes in from there. So as an example, if the assassin character says that he wants to infiltrate the local gang that's running the docks, just to sort of get involved and see what's what and who's, and just to sort of learn some information while the other players are training and doing other functions. So there's like essentially a 2-week downtime, and the assassin character says, I might infiltrate this. That might be listed as a simple or a difficult task depending on what level they wish to be coming in at. If the player says, I want to infiltrate the local gang, disguised obviously, and I want to be just a low-level thug, or I want to be just at the street level, just to sort of get a feel for the organization, that could be simple. If somebody says, I want to infiltrate, but I want to come in as like the hired muscle, or someone with a talent or skill that's a little bit higher up, Donnie the baker, Vinny the barber, or something like that, then that's when they might be more difficult, and inserting themselves into the higher end or the upper echelons of the gang could be still difficult or even extraordinary. Pretending to be a mob boss in general, and then setting up and trying to force something to happen or to find information out and so on, that again might be difficult. And so that's what we look at in terms of the level of the assassin and spy. We find all of these numbers get adjusted based on what the amount of preparation that the player has. So if the player has access to as much information about the crime gangs as possible, might make it easier. If they've been following and have been tracking some of these key players for a week and then inserts, that might make the percentage chance slightly different as well, and so on. So the player has to come up with some ideas as to what it is that they want to try and do and how they want to try and go about it. Some of it's off screen, some of it happens outside of the game itself, and it almost becomes like a small mini game. If they wish to infiltrate the militia in order to be able to get into the barracks and set themselves up to be someone of, to be able to sort out a jailbreak, that might be difficult, but it might be something that it's easier, or it could, depending on how many militia there are and how many people and differences and so on, they could be fresh recruits, new recruits, and all of that. And then you're looking at what they need to try and do to get to curry favor and so on. All of that doesn't have to happen in terms of role playing. That can just happen with a handful of dice rolls, if you wish. Or they can do a little bit of dice rolling and a little bit of role playing, which affects the dice rolls and so on. So the assassin character that has these other functions, if that's what they're going to want to explore, as the DM, you need to be able to be prepared for that and what am I going to do and how am I going to get this to be done. And same too as when they decide that they wish to try and use their assassination ability. That can end something very quick, and you have to be prepared for that. This is their class, these are the abilities that they have, and so this is something that they can do. You can't shy away from that, and you can't reduce it to a point where it's no point. You could literally say there are no assassin class in my game, and that's when that discussion comes up. When the character says, when the player says, I want to be an assassin, and the DM says, actually, I don't allow my players to be assassins. Okay, that's the rule that we're playing for this, and that's it, we're done. So when the DM is creating the milieu, needs to be put out how these character classes are sorted out and adjusted. So since we brought it up, what we're going to do is just have a quick look at the matrices for thieves and assassins. And the combat matrix for the thief and assassin includes their backstabbing. So levels 1 to 4, it's times 2, 5 to 8, times 3, 9 to 12, times 4, and times 5 for 13 to 16. Because as an assassin, you're only going up to levels 14 and 15 anyway. The characters aren't overly beefy in terms of fighting ability. They end up being, for the first 4 levels, levels 1 through 4, as good as a 0 level fighter, which, you know, I mean, even though they've got access to lots of weapons, they're not primary fighters. They are very much a backup fighter if that's required. They do have access to shields, which is good, but leather armor if they're for most of their armor requirements, and anything that's assassin related needs to be done in leather, not in, even if they're a fighter assassin, they can wear armor during combat, but then if they wish to do any of their disguise work or spy work, they need to be in leather or less. They no more than leather is their armor. And this is the table that's the coolest one. This is the assassin's table for assassinations. Lots of asterisks, but essentially there's a lot of work in here that they need to sort out. And as it says, the percentage shown is that for success, instant death, under near optimum conditions. You may adjust slightly upwards for perfect conditions. Similarly, deduct if the intended victim is wary, takes precautions, and is guarded, and so on. And if the assassination is being attempted on behalf of the player character, so you hire somebody, then they have to do all the planning effectively, what they want done. But again, as I said, if you're going to have a character that's an assassin, this is going to come up, and this is going to have to come through, and you need to sort of work out what it is that you're wanting it to do. There's plenty of examples across the board of the long-range sniper. Essentially, the character that they move silently, come up behind a guard, and quickly dispatch the guard or someone without making a noise. All of that. That's all assassination attempts, and success being dead, and failure meaning just doing damage, which could result in, obviously, if they don't succeed, the capability of the alerting others or turning into a full-blown combat in some other way. But essentially, what the players have to do is still work out what it is that they want to try and achieve. And I'm going to throw in a small anecdote of something that's happened recently in a game. Just a bit of a background on this particular game. The players were in a city, and one of their so-called allies has been found out to be playing both ends and being working with the enemy in some way, almost like a double agent. as well as a few other sort of things going on as well. The characters were all involved in most of the characters were involved in training, so they all had 2 weeks or so off to get their training sorted and to get themselves leveled up. Meanwhile, the assassin just says, you know, I'm going to follow this guy. I have a couple of weapons from some Scarlet Brotherhood that we've fought in the past. I want to follow, find out where they're going, what they're doing, what's the movements, get at a spot of vulnerability, and attack, do an assassination, and then try to leave evidence pointing to the another group. So, given the time frame and everything else, we sort all that out, we get it all going, and I get them to roll, and they roll fantastic value, giving them what would normally have been like a requirement of 30% or less. Actually, it's probably more like 15%, because it was like the target was a 10th level magic user, and the character was about 5th level, was a 5th level assassin. So it was 15%, plus a couple of bonuses, minus a couple of adjustments. Sub 10% makes the roll, gets a successful value, and then I do a spy check to determine whether being able to leave enough clues to point to someone else. It fails that, but in the meantime it comes out that this particular magic user is on a list from another spy group elsewhere, and people just put the conclusion that that's where it was done, like it was done by those people instead. So we went through communication, we worked out what was going to happen, and all the end results and so on. Made the dice rolls, dice don't lie, and the results came in. So as far as everyone else was concerned, during the 2 weeks of training, this is what happened. Bang, bang, bang. And suddenly he's found with a, the magic user's found in an alleyway with a shiv, several, in his back and whatever else. And that's just part of the function of the abilities. So this is something that as the DM, you just have to let it roll, and it can make for epic gameplay, or it can break something. I mean, it would have been nicer to have had a much more of an in-depth investigation into the magic user, some role play between the two, big fight potentially, possibly something else happening, and then bang, 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 lots of real big sort of like explosions. But instead it was all handled off screen, and everyone wakes up one day with just reading the newspaper, wow, look, what happened here? And that's how it works. So there's nothing wrong with that, and it's absolutely all right in the way that it's handled. It's just what you don't want is obviously overly abuse. And that's where it comes down in terms of, well, okay, percentages of doing what is it that you want to do. If you have the assassin that's decided to get into a stronghold, and they sneak up, they climb a wall, they're on a rampart, they go up to a guard, they take out the guard, roll a percentile dice, it's in their favor, the guard dies quickly, then they move down, they try and do it again, bad dice roll, the guard still takes damage, which might still kill them if they take too much damage, obviously, but it's a more noisier effect. And that's, again, as the DM, you just have to accept that this is how it works and this is what needs to happen. And so with the assassination roll, it can be as if you might have, okay, look, the assassin surprises something, a first level assassin surprises an orc, and he says, I go for the assassination shot. And you go, okay, well, I'll give you a 40% chance on that. I mean, obviously you don't tell them that. They just make the dice roll. Or you can make the dice roll, and then it's just the damage, and which may still kill them anyway. But obviously the assassination table just makes it much more assassin cooler like, if you know what I mean. And you could have it set up where it's the assassin is we've got a crossbow sitting on the big tower in the middle of the city, and waiting for their target to show up as they approach the bakery, and that's their shot. They get the one shot at doing that, and they're off. So these are all parts of the functions that you have to just accept as part of being the assassin, and it's not something that you can shy away from. As the DM, when you're deciding that, yep, you're going to have the assassin class in the game, you're going to have the players allowing to be assassins, and the player says, I want to be an assassin, these are going to come up. So this is going to happen, and you need to sort of allow it to happen and get it all going from there. Once you've got it worked out, then you can let the dice roll, and whatever happens from there. And you can't be upset either way, because this is just the function of the class. Any more than you could a fighter that it's 4th level up against a bunch of kobolds and suddenly just has 4 kobolds just sliced away. That's just the function of the class. Same too with what the assassin is capable of doing as well. So here's an example of what we're talking about in terms of this, so what we just mentioned about here. We literally have it written here. Therefore, if an 8th level assassin snuck up on and surprised a 10th level magic user in the dungeon and successfully assassinated him, the assassin would receive 1000 XP plus blah plus 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 plus. So it's that simple and easy in terms of how it can get done, and where the DM may be hoping for a much 10th level magic user to be so much more involved and whiz bang flashes and whatever else. It can go that way, and that's how it can roll very quickly against the story arc potentially. And you got to keep that in mind as well. Again, when you're the DM and you have these involved and you've got all of this here, this is what you just have to have in your mindset as what could possibly happen. So poisons are the tools of the trade for the assassin. They learn all forms of different functions and so on. So what we have are ingestive poisons, which goes on food and water, and insinuative, which goes on blades and so on. Onset time, and so how long does it take to put it on there, and then we're off. So what we're looking at here, you'll see a lot of this, unless it's really the nasty poisons. Most of them do a hit point damage, save or no save, and that's how, unlike monster poisons, that's how it sort of rolls. And then of course you've got your slow poison spell, which can keep somebody alive for hours at a time until either the poison is removed, or it rolls away, like it just gets done by the system. So if you put some ingestive B inside some food, they might take 30 hit points of damage, which would be enough to kill them. You cast slow poison on them, they've got a couple of hit points left as they're waiting for the effects of the poison to just wear away, if it does. And that's part of what again, the DM has to sort of figure out how they want to handle poisons and where the poisons come from. You can't just walk down the street and say, I want to buy a poison. Can the assassin make a poison? Well, that's actually an interesting question, because there is a way for the assassin to become a poison master. but it's something that's very specific, and I'm not going to go into that because there's a great line in here that says, unless they ask, do not tell. So anyway, we'll stick with that. But the insinuative is when you just have it put on your blade and then you stab them and they get the blade damage and make a saving throw, and then there's further damage on top of that. And again, if you've got slow poison, you can keep people lingering on the edge as the poison sort of is slowing their systems down and so on. But if you're going to allow for, again, part 1, then it's part 2 and part 3. So what the DM also has to take into account is things like how the poisons are made, what type of poisons and so on. Vegetable poisons versus mineral poisons if necessary, insinuatives, contact poisons and such. There's all of those things. So when they get to a certain level, if they're making their own poison, what they need to do is you just look at the fabrication of potions on special ingredients and how that's handled, and we can do it from there. And then what they need to study and who they need to study from in order to be able to get those skills. And all of these are soft skills that don't exist inside the actual, they're not codified as part of the character class. It's just if the character class decides to become, they want to get into that business, that's what they need to do. But poisons are an interesting side effect along the way. And as we can say, so with the A, B's and C's, D's, all those asterisks, which essentially lend itself to various adjustments to saves, and then you've got the racial saves as well, and constitutions and so on. I guess one of the big questions that people ask is often, where does the assassin class come from? So the assassin class became introduced to the game in the original D&D through Blackmore, where the function of the assassin class, or subclass, which was a subclass of thief, was disguise, spying, and speaking lots of languages. And poison. I think poison was the actual ability or something like that. But by the time we got to AD&D, the addition to the class, to what the players could play, was sort of a little bit different, in that you had a more stronger assassination rule, and they could pick out some of the abilities of the thief as well, in terms of what to do. But in terms of where the inspiration for the assassin came from, that goes back to the 11th century, in what would be modern day Iran, sort of north of Iran area. The Hassani Sabah was the ruler, the grandfather of the assassins, and had a fortress that was in the wilderness on top of a mountain that had a string of followers that would then influence local politics. And that you can sort of see a long draw from there into the AD&D assassin class, where they have to form a group, and the original versions of that initial sort of back in the 11th century, they were a secret society, or not quite cult, but it's much more played out that way by the people who want to write it up that way. It can be easily seen as that. In terms of when they hit Blackmore, so back in the early gaming days, they were neutral. They weren't law or chaos. And then by the time they get to AD&D, because of the nature of how easily they kill, the evil alignment obviously has to be brought in. And this is where some of the the black and white, evil, not so evil, and all of that. Like, there's a lot to do with alignments in first edition AD&D that need to be sorted out by the DM, and this is again one of those areas. And if the DM is going to allow certain things to be, then the DM needs to work out exactly where it all fits. The Lankmar series have the Slayers Brotherhood, which was a subset of the Thieves Guild, and specifically hired for either armed guards or actual missions of causing death and dismemberment. So they were, again, more of that assassins working in a guild or working in a secret society or working together with the Thieves Guild for political ends. So how the guilds work within the MIU and what the players belong to and where it all comes from, that's up to the DM and the player to work out. It's entirely possible the player did belong to an evil cult and then doesn't want to be that way, aka Sydney Bristow from Alias. And so she, in that TV show, she pretty much works her way to dismantling or trying to undo everything that was done previously. Other classic sort of assassin styles, obviously you've got, like, you know, Hawkeye and Black Widow from the Marvel, either from the MCU sort of category, or Black Widow from the Marvel comics. She was an assassin. And obviously James Bond and so on. So how you want to handle your character still lends itself to a lot of different options, but between the DM and the player, you have to work these things out. Alright, so hopefully I've covered a reasonable amount of topic in a sort of concise way. I can go really deep into how these mechanics work, but there's so many gaps left intentionally for the DM to figure out how things work, where they want to go, and it's not worth trying to push or promote an idea if that's not going to be anywhere near what the DM wants to go down. So, alright, so thank you so very much. What we have is our explanation of the assassin class, and hopefully it's been useful. And I know that there are a lot of DMs out there that avoided the class, put it back into the NPC category, and so on, but it'd be interesting to hear how it all worked out with everyone and what people did. So please leave comments. Again, of course, subscribe, like, and all of the usual routines. It's been a long time between this one and the last one, so I'm hoping that I've hit a nail firmly with that content, and we can get something else out. A few games of different varieties as well to come, so that's worth looking into. Alright, well, so thank you very much, everyone, and your patience is always appreciated. So thank you, and to everyone who's been hanging out for something new, here we go. Alright, thank you. We'll see you all later, and have fun.